Greetings, X-Culture participants. My name is Joshua. I am a previous participant from spring of 2016, and I am one of just 35 participants who have come back as volunteer coaches to help all of you get a little further and have some amazing experiences and amazing results. One of my responsibilities is to find helpful things to say to everyone. And my attempt at being helpful today will involve going over some ideas about preparing the final draft of your report. It's important to understand that we do want the high standards of APA, and for everyone's convenience, there are APA templates in both Microsoft Word and Google Docs, which are easy to find and fairly easy to use. But we don't necessarily want to write a large academic paper. You have a certain amount of artistic flexibility and a certain amount of creative flexibility when it comes to the writing. And it's important to remember, as you have been going through all of these weeks gathering important information, to remember the needs of your audience. Your client is going to have very little free time to read your report, no matter how well-intentioned it may be. It's important to put all of the important things up front. So if you have some experience in journalism or with the school newspaper, think inverted pyramid writing, the most important thing on top, the least important thing down at the end of the page. Your client is also going to want some clear, simple how-to advice. If you can find the steps to get started with a new product or a new market, and you can just list them off 1, 2, 3, that would be extremely helpful. And for the sake of style and keeping things organized, try to keep your advice and relevant details on the same page. Over the course of this slideshow, I'm going to be showing some different examples of things that went very well in papers and things that could have been fixed in just a few minutes. But I'm going to start off with a professional example that had an amazing amount of creativity. If I had the chance, I would recommend that every business student read the Coca-Cola 2016 Sustainability Report, because it's an amazing collection of relevant information that the stakeholders want to know, along with beautiful pictures, beautiful clip art used as bullet points, and tables that are designed in a way to seem much more capable than a normal table in a report might be. I'm specifically going to be looking at some issues related to title pages, the details that you show about your team, body text, executive summaries, tables, headers and footers, charts, and a little advice about conclusions. But I'm going to embarrass myself first, because it's only fair if I do. My team, when we were working with some information for InnoSpark, had a pretty good report, but we had too many pages. 45 was too many. I think the page recommendations have been communicated better this year than they were when I was involved. But I'm not the only person who missed the idea that maybe you should stop at 25. One of the classmates in my night class was even more ambitious than I was, and she got her team's report up to 65 pages. Our executive summary had too many words. We were timid about using lots of color, except for a few screenshots in a how-to section. And we didn't look very closely at information about the previous winners of these competitions, so we didn't learn from them. Well, I'm hoping that by showing you some examples, you will have something specific to learn from and reflect on. With your title page, you have a lot of design flexibility. Plain APA is conservative and simple. I stuck with something close to plain APA. And in some ways, text-only covers can be attractive depending on how you organize the data. Photos and graphics get lots of attention, but they also have to be appropriate, sized correctly, flattering, and not in any way distracting. And a good way to create distractions is to stretch or resize photos, particularly JPEGs or icons that look nice at a very small size, but bad when you blow it up to a full page. So here are 3 examples of title pages that went very well. On the left, we have one that is text only. In the center, we have one with a large photograph that is horizontally and vertically centered on the page, and it's cropped well. On the right, we have something that's a little more ambitious. Someone with Photoshop skills took a picture and expanded it and made a lovely front cover that has a reasonable amount of detail. And zooming in just a little more, because I know how Google Hangouts makes everything look a little blurry, the text-only cover on the left looks like a crisp, clean business card, which is why it stood out when I was going through, I would say, a couple hundred of these. The one in the middle has a few different font sizes and font effects as you look at the different parts of the title. Polaris Industries India in bold, strategic expansion, italic, much smaller font for Team 470. And they created just a little bit of visual variety at the top that is kind of interesting and helps draw your eyes down at the picture. And on the right, we have something that is ambitious, but if someone in your team has some Photoshop skills and would be willing to devote 2 or 3 hours to working on something like that, I would say go for it. But I'm more worried about the teams that have a weak title page. This is a simple title page that could have been perfectly acceptable, except there are 2 different issues. If you look at the top, the running head is in a different font than the rest of the page. If you want Times New Roman, please make it all Times New Roman. If you want Arial or Calibri or something similar to that, please be consistent. And then the obvious point of X Culture Project being left aligned instead of centered underneath Team 716 is distracting, and it makes the whole front of the report look a little amateurish, which is a shame considering the number of hours that every team puts into these. Here is a clip from the bottom of a title page that was a little weak, but could have been corrected in just 2 buttons, Control and Enter. This was a title page with a normal title at the top, some descriptions of the team members, but you see an executive summary, which should not be part of the same page. It should be on the next, or preferably a third after your table of contents. And here are 3 more that are weak in different ways, primarily just from being off balance. But they all could have been corrected in 10 minutes or less. On the left, we have one where every detail is crammed into the top, mostly into the top left corner. In the center, we have something that looks off balance because this very richly colored photo is at the bottom instead of in the center or at the top where it would be more eye-catching. Then Team 375 is on the left when everything is centered, and there's a page number in the bottom right when everything else is centered. And the right is text only. It could have been just fine. It's sort of squished together in the middle, and most of it is left aligned, but not all of it. If one part is centered and the rest is not, that's distracting, and it makes the reader wonder if the students were freshmen versus seniors. But these 3 are not all bad. They all could have been fixed, and they all could have been respectable in different ways. Let's zoom in a little more. With the cover on the left, I would take the Polaris logo out of the top right corner, maybe put it in the center just below the title, Polaris Industries India. And then the team details probably also should have been under the title, probably centered, and maybe a more consistent font size. With the cover in the middle, the Polaris logo is expanded to the point of being jagged around the edges, which probably is not showing up, but a little jagged. Team 375 could have been set up a little differently as the title for this table. The table has blue borders going around every cell, which is not necessarily helping when you already have alternating bands of color in the background, which would be eye-catching enough by itself. And then this lovely photo, which has a nice range of color, is not cropped very well. There's so much of the sky showing above the horizon line that you have to wonder if this is for the scenery rather than a photo of the products. And the one on the right, which I think a little bit of that got cut off, all of the details about the team members were very close together with no break between the team member's name and the email address and the country. That could have been spread out a little more, and there could have been a line break between the title and the team number and the client and the other details going further down. Most of these reports will have some kind of information about the team members on the front page, but the most attractive ones that I have seen save a lot of those details for page 2, in part because it's difficult to share a lot in a very limited amount of space. And there are some teams who want to share a lot about contributions or the countries that they represent. Here is one that is simple and basic, and it's not pretty but functional. It's a table, but no visible table borders distract the reader from anything that was further up, such as the title. There's ample space between the names of the team members and the email addresses and the countries. And they aren't being too ambitious, just open enough. Here's one that made a slightly better use of space. There are borders around each cell, which I'm not sure is the best thing, but all of the contents are centered underneath each header, and the roles were kept very simple, 4 words or less. If your team wants to share the role of each member and you can keep it that short, then you could have something like this on your front page and it would look reasonable. But if one of your team members is planning on using this as part of a portfolio and a resume as they go off from college to look for work, and they want something more than 4 words, they want page-by-page details of what they contributed, that would be a situation where everything would look better moved on to page number 2. Here is a week table and week team details that did not have to be weak at all. There is a very strange amount of white space under name and email. The words studies in on that top row are squished together and stretched out in a funny way. And then by each team member's name, their country is listed 3 times when once might have been sufficient. And then there's this strange empty gap in the center, which I don't think I understand. When it comes to the body text, I have seen some creative choices. Not everyone uses Times New Roman, but it's easy and respectable to use the APA standard because the reader will see it and know right away what they're getting into. You can punch up your report a little bit with colored section headings, and that's not too distracting. It wouldn't cost you any points. But we want to avoid accidental walls of text or accidental changes between one typeface and another. Just to keep this part simple, in the reading and in the webinars leading up to these final weeks in X-Culture, I hope that you got the message that bullet points are potentially more useful than paragraphs, in part because these are supposed to be short reports, 15 to 25 pages. And here's an example of bullet points done well. We have 5 bullet points that could have easily been a 4 or 5 sentence paragraph that would have been more imposing on the reader and potentially not as immediate or forceful. Here's an example of an artistic choice that I thought came so close to being brilliant, but kind of didn't follow through. This comes from a list of potential distributors. There were at least 3, and under each distributor, there was this blue colored box with contact details inside. And I was looking at the 2 or 3 pages in the report with this information. I was thinking, these look like business cards. And with just another 2 minutes of work, they could have looked more like business cards to the point of really standing out and being eye-catching. What if Bikers Nepal had been moved in to the very top line of this box, the phone and mobile information had been spread out a little more, and then a background image had been added, such as texture for newsprint or antique paper or something along those lines. So in Microsoft Word, you can add lots of different options to a table or to an individual box like that. Here is an example of something else that could have been fixed very quickly with 1 key on your keyboard. We have a header, market size of Sri Lanka, at the bottom of one page, and then everything about the market size on the next page. It's very possible that after a long day, your client will look at this and decide, I'm done turning pages. I want to go home. And they will miss out on what could have been the best part of the report, something very convincing about a market. So I would strongly prefer to see headers with the text on the same page. And here's an example of a perfectly normal paragraph that is formatted correctly, but is weak when you start going into the contents. From a distance, it looks just fine. But up close, that first sentence reads like something out of an encyclopedia. Kazakhstan is the world's largest landlocked country, 2,724,000 square kilometers, 17.8 million inhabitants. I can't think of many reports that would actually sell a client on a particular course of action based on that sort of data that would come from Encyclopedia Britannica or Wikipedia or elsewhere. Maybe if your client is trying to buy up lots of real estate and you're demonstrating that there is low population density, I could see that being some kind of interesting proposal, but I'm not aware of any clients looking to do that at this time. The executive summary is the most important part of the body of your paper. It should have the same formatting as the rest of the report. And please put some time into editing this. It's the part that will definitely be read by the judges, by your client, probably by your professors as well. I'm proud to say that my team had a great first paragraph in their executive summary. Unfortunately, after that first paragraph, we had a second and a third and a fourth. We didn't get the message about bullet points making things easier on the reader. And consequently, we didn't quite win. Great summaries early on do inspire your reader to keep going. And if you can give this one page flow and a fast pace, then potentially they will keep going all the way through. If you can keep your executive summary slightly less than a full page, it's going to be more attractive than if it's a page and a half. Here's an example of something that's very straightforward. It's very well focused. It starts with the single most important message in the entire report, the suggested market, and 3 good ideas directly beneath that. Then the SWOT analysis is also very appropriate because, unlike some of the other papers I've read, this SWOT analysis ties directly into the strengths and weaknesses of the suggested market. Sometimes I'll read a report and the SWOT analysis is about something else. It's about a competitor or it's about a product, not about the main argument being made. And then this good pattern kept contributing down the page through distributors and other sections. Here's another example that's also attractive because of the way there are 2 different kinds of bullet points forming layers to organize ideas. It's very eye-catching. Here is something that's close to what I would do if I had to go back in time and start over with my wonderful team helping InnoSpark. I would have a very short introductory paragraph, then a few bullet points, and then maybe I would alternate another very short paragraph, a few more bullet points, focusing on one clear message at a time. Unfortunately, I was not able to find one that's exactly like what I would do. This paragraph in this particular executive summary is short enough, but if you look carefully, that first line was indented twice. The word report is capitalized when I don't think it should be. And these first 2 bullet points both say the same thing, 22 million people. I bet those could have been combined. As you go through your paper, there's more than one way to consolidate information, and tables are one of those tools. It's a very effective way to display a range of data and to make comparisons and maybe to summarize data. And it's useful among other reasons because you can skip out on writing complete sentences. You can make things short and you can customize them quite a bit. This is an example that I thought was just wonderful because it is so clear it did not even need a title. Nepal, Sri Lanka, Kazakhstan along the top row makes it a market comparison. And the data immediately below those headers The geographical factors of ports and airports are making it clear that this is logistical data. If you're moving a physical product from one place to another, you absolutely want to know how you can move it and how much it will cost. If you're making small, lightweight objects like electronics, airports would win and Nepal would have the advantage. If you're moving big, heavy objects like machinery or cars or trucks, then waterways give you a competitive advantage. So Sri Lanka and Kazakhstan would have a huge advantage over Nepal, and they would be roughly tied with each other, depending on other factors. I also like the gentle use of background color, but I'm not sure why world port source and the other citations are directly in each cell underneath the details when it could have been moved over to the description under geographical factors and under population. That probably would have made it look just a tiny bit better. Here's an example of a week table, similar to a week table I showed earlier, because of some strange use of white space. And more than strange uses of white space and double spacing lines of text when it's not to your advantage, this table breaks over 2 pages. We're starting to read about this person from Colombia, marketing objectives, target, and then the page ends. You have to turn the page to see markets, position statement, etc. This table could have been corrected in a few different ways, such as adjusting the width of the columns, which you can do just by pointing and clicking with your mouse, by adjusting font sizes, by changing the spacing of the lines. Double spaced isn't always necessary within a table. And if you're in a position where it looks like the table is going to split over 2 pages the way this one does, please consider moving it elsewhere in your report. If you can keep it all in one place, it's easier to understand. Your headers and footers are one place where you can add some personality and some flair, and it won't distract, it won't cost you any points. The standard APA header is just fine the way it is, but we can punch it up in several different ways. Page borders that go all the way around all 4 sides can make your report look a little more attractive. Color and artwork can also be used, and I found one that's pretty darn good. It has an X-Culture logo in the top right corner instead of a page number, and instead of the usual running header with the name of the report, this has a running header with the names of the contributors. So maybe they were hoping for a personal phone call from their client. The only thing that might have made this better is if the names of the participants were on the same level as the image in the top right corner. That probably could have been corrected just by right-clicking on the image and changing one of the formatting options. Here is an example of something that was just an accidental oversight. Things like this happen, but this footer is very weak because of the message type here. I don't know if that came out of a template or if it was a message from one team member to another or a message from one team member to himself. Do something here later. But if you leave that in, it looks like an accident, and that's going to make the reader wonder how much of your report is an accident. Like tables, charts can help you make immediate comparisons in a variety of ways. Like tables, they can take up a lot less space than the same material if you were to write out grammatically correct sentences. And sometimes it just helps to make things very clear for the reader, such as if you're trying to identify a particular kind of distribution or a particular kind of trend. There are many ways that we can adjust these charts in Excel or Google Docs with different colors or gradients of color, changing background grids, changing labels, changing the titles, having breakout numbers along the top. But what I'd love to see charts being used for are a comparison, because if you can make a decision very easy for your client, you are more likely to convert that client. This particular comparison is between India and Sri Lanka, using different aspects of their national character. And just going across this, if you don't know what the product is, you might not see the value. But this was for a report for off-road vehicles, for people who love to be outside, who love to go on adventures. And with that in mind, the difference in individualism, even though it's kind of small, the difference in masculinity, And the drop in uncertainty avoidance makes India stand out as a much more attractive market. Because without knowing anything else, this suggests there are more people who might like to be outside, who might like to travel alone, and might be comfortable doing small repairs to their off-road vehicle on their own, such as changing a flat tire. Of course, it's not the same thing as a detailed market survey or a focus group, but it certainly has some character to it. Similar to charts, pictures can add a lot to your report. And this is a great picture because it is a map with a path traced out, giving you valuable logistic data about how to go from point A to point B. In this case, going through a water channel is definitely going to be easier than going over several mountain ranges. And this picture was also valuable because the formatting under the picture, figure 6, potential route from Mumbai to Almaty, is exactly how every image should be indicated. Technically, I think the text is supposed to be left aligned, but you have some artistic leeway here. And then there is citation data beneath that, transit time, distance calculator, port-to-port distances. Very useful. As you approach the end of your paper, if you are still below 25 pages and there's something you want to restate, then the conclusion is the best place to do that. You're not supposed to introduce anything new. Just rephrase your introduction, rephrase a key point that matters, and maybe summarize your best strategy if you were offering 2 or 3. The best conclusions are very short, and some very good reports don't have one at all. But here's an example that I thought was great because it's just a single paragraph that gets to the point immediately based on our 8 weeks of research. We recommend you go to Sri Lanka. We think Sri Lanka is a great market, and we have at least one source, Euromonitor, who says the same thing, 20 markets of the future. As you go through the writing and editing process, it is important to stay close to APA with your citation, as close as possible. And if you have a reliable source to go by, life is easier. Many universities have a writing lab that you can go to in person and speak to a paid professional who will ask lots of questions about what you're doing and what kind of citation you're trying to make. In my case, I was taking lots of night classes, so I had to use an online writing lab, and the Purdue Online Writing Lab is excellent. If you have questions that you would like a coach to review, there is the coaching email address that I'm sure you were introduced to at least once earlier in the competition. And if you have something specific about formatting your final report that you can break down to a very simple yes/no question, such as on page 3, does this paragraph look okay? On page 10, is this table formatted well? On page 2, is this running header formatted correctly? Then please email it to me. I will do you the courtesy of giving you a clear yes or no answer, maybe with some advice, but it would be difficult for me if you were to give me an open-ended question. Tell me about chapter 2. Is chapter 2 okay? I might spend an hour writing a response that is about something completely unrelated to the one thing you were really interested in. And just to stick with the idea that we should reference things, the Coca-Cola 2016 Sustainability Report is a great resource if you are going to be designing reports or promotional materials for any of your classes or employers in the future. And those examples I've been showing are from 18 different competitors from fall of 2016. I wish I could thank them all in person, but I think they would be a little annoyed. It's over. Why are you bothering us now? Okay, that brings us to the end of the presentation, which was 5 minutes longer than I intended, sorry.